I would say I'm Ursula von der Leyen's worst nightmare.
But
in reality, I'm pretty much just a regular MEP trying to do good by the people.
Olá, amigos. Eu convidava-vos a ver este vídeo sobre uma entrevista à eurodeputada Christine Anderson. Para quem não sabe, é a pior inimiga de Ursula von der Leyen. Dito de outra forma, é uma eurodeputada com eles nos sítios, é uma eurodeputada ao modo antigo, que não tem medo, diz as coisas como elas são e, claro, que agora a verdade ofende, que o wokeismo está a ter um problema com esta eurodeputada, ao ponto dela ser processada por discurso de ódio. O que é que ela disse? Disse que só existiam dois géneros, o masculino e o feminino. Portanto, vocês reparem, a Europa está a colapsar, a criminalidade está em níveis como nunca houve, violações em Barda, assaltos em Barda, facas, preocupação da União Europeia. O discurso de ódio não se pode dizer que só existem homens e mulheres. Vejam o absurdo. Isto é apenas uma coisa que ela fala lá na entrevista dela. Ela também diz que a União Europeia neste momento já não representa ninguém. Aquilo é um clube de lobistas que detestam-nos, querem nos lixar a vida com burocracias e com leis absurdas. E desde que a gente pague isto tudo e eles saquem milhões com os seus negócios, com as empresas, isso está tudo bem. Ouçam, é melhor ela falar, portanto, vejam o vídeo, que ouçam. Assim, nunca vai passar nas TVs e é informação de dentro da Europa, portanto, é daquela informação que nós devíamos saber e aceder facilmente e estão-nos sempre a esconder este tipo de informação. Vejam o vídeo que vão sentir uma certa revolta daquelas verdades que nos andam a esconder.
Why you are Ursula von der Leyen? By the way, Ursula von der Leyen is a leader in a way of the EU, but why you are?
Well, we have a fundamental difference in what democracy actually is. So I believe in democratic principles that the voter gets to say how he wants to be governed. And to achieve that, he goes to the ballot, he casts his vote. But at this point, it seems to be no matter what the voter votes for, he gets the exact opposite. So that, like I said, a fundamental difference. And the way things are going now, it's the ever more or the increase in surveillance. We've just seen it with chat control. After we Parliament denied chat control twice, they actually managed to get it on the agenda a third time. And this time they voted for the expedited procedure. So here we are. The EU is not a state. Thank God it isn't. But they're trying to establish some kind of the United States of Europe or whatever they're dreaming up with, which is actually quite clever if you think about it. Who would benefit actually from a United States of Europe? Who would benefit? Well, big business would benefit from it. Big pharma, all the tech companies, they would benefit. Why would they benefit? Because they don't have to deal with 27 different member states and their governments. All they have to do is get Ursula von der Leyen on board with whatever it is they want. And that's it. And we've seen that during COVID, right? Pfizer, he was able to strike his deal because Ursula von der Leyen is like one of his buddy friends. And she managed to, sign a contract for, 4.3 billion doses. That's half the planet, for God's sakes, with these stupid mRNA injection contracts. And all of the member states, they couldn't even say, no, we don't want this. And now we're seeing it. Pfizer is actually suing a couple of member states of the EU because they did not take as much as Ursula von der Leyen promised them that they would take.
Against Europe? You want Europe to be abolished? Explain.
Yeah.
Because...
Yeah, I'm going to stop you right there. See, that's exactly what they're doing. I am not against Europe. Europe is probably the most beautiful continent on this entire planet. The world envies us. We are living on this beautiful continent, and it's such a small continent with so many different cultures, languages. It's just rich, diverse. So it's just beautiful. But the EU is not Europe. That is entirely different. The EU is actually destroying Europe. That's what they're doing. So when people, accuse me, you are against Europe. No, I'm not. I love Europe. And I want Europe to stay the way it is, with the different peoples, the different cultures, the different languages. I mean, all of it. When I'm in Greece, I don't expect to see a lifestyle that reminds me of, the stiffness of Germany. When I go to Italy, I want to live the Italian vibe, how the people live there.
So you are against the European Parliament existing?
I'm against the EU in the way it turned out to be. So the EU started out with countries getting together, identifying certain areas where it would be beneficial for us to work together, which was totally fine.
Trade.
Right? Exactly. So, it started out with the Montanunion. It was basically the trade in steel or production of steel and stuff like that. So they came together and came up with projects and worked together in that aspect. But what we're seeing now is the EU grasping ever more competencies, which in the contracts are actually the responsibility of the member states.
You mean the treaties?
Well, yeah, exactly. So, but they're grabbing more competencies, thus rendering the member states pretty much powerless. They can't do anything about it, right? The EU also lacked,
just to explain to the people, most of the regulations that we have in member states are coming from the EU.
Exactly. At this point, yeah. And that is also interesting. We're talking about gross violations of democratic principles. Usually it is like that the national parliaments are the elected representatives of the people of that respective country. So in my case, Germany, the Bundestag, right? So if the German government wanted to pass a law and the Bundestag, the elected members of the Bundestag said, no, we don't want this law. They vote no, and it's done. This law would be, or this regulation would be dead. But now we have the EU level. So now what they're doing is the member of the German government, mind you, that wants to pass this law, he now travels to Brussels and he talks to his colleagues from the other national governments, and they simply pass the law here. Because the ones that are passing the laws here are the members of the national executive. It's not the legislative. So, to intermix this. So in essence, what that means is even if the German elected representatives, the member of the Bundestag, say, no, we don't want this law, then the member of the German government travels to Brussels, passes the law here, and then it comes back as a regulation to Germany, and we now must implement it into a law. And this is the principle. It happens in every single member state. So effectively, what is happening here is the national parliaments are being overruled. There goes your democratic principle of, division of power, legislative, judicative, and legislative. So Poland says, well, excuse me, ripping our borders wide open? No, sorry, we don't want this. So what does the EU Commission do? Well, if you don't want this, guess what? We cut your money. You will not get any money in Hungary, the same thing, right? So it's blackmail. Pretty much what they're doing, right? They're luring you in with all kinds of promises. Oh, this is going to be so great for you, blah, 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 blah. But in essence, the national governments, they're standing there and they have nothing to decide anymore because they're being superseded by the EU Commission. And quite frankly, Ursula von der Leyen, it's not just her, among many. She doesn't give a darn about regular people. She cares about her buddy, Albert Bourla at Pfizer, right? So he can get ungodly known rich. Well, we're talking billions and billions of euros here. And, but the ones that were supposed to benefit from this so-called vaccine, which wasn't a vaccine, by the way, they didn't benefit from it. Not only did they not benefit from it, I mean, in the mRNA injection, best case scenario, they were completely useless. Worst case, they were harmful. And there is a lot of cases documented where they were actually fatal. People died from it. But the pharmaceutical companies, even though they made billions and billions in profit, they're exempt from any liability. And they're not even interested in taking a look at what did they actually do in these studies. It stinks. And this is the stuff, once you get lured in, with all the promises and the benefits, the downside, to me, it's not worth it. So what I really hate about the EU is its tendency to enslave the peoples in the member states. And the thing is, I mean, they've proven it. So whenever there is a government in power in the member state that the EU doesn't like, or Ursula von der Leyen doesn't like as a representative of EU Commission, they have ways to make sure that the right guys get elected, right? We've seen that in Romania. I forgot, Ceausescu was his name.
Yeah.
They just banned him from the election. They accused him of being a spy for the Russians. They have yet to provide a shred of evidence for that claim. But he was gone. He could no longer
run.
Not even run for office anymore. So, I mean, what they kind of did in Hungary, that was a shit show in and of itself. I mean,
with Orban, you mean the last election?
Exactly. So, I mean, what they're doing is pretty much these astroturfing, right?
And we're, by the way, we're together in a committee that is called Democracy Shield, that is protecting democracy and elections in the EU, which
Excellent.
were 90% of the time talking about Russian interference in the elections in the EU, and the hypocritical thing is that we are doing the same thing us to ourselves. Like we are trying to interfere in Moldova's elections. We are trying to interfere in our own elections from one state to the other to say like what you said in Romania and all this stuff. So it's like a bit hypocritical. So let's talk about freedom of speech. You are a huge advocate for freedom of speech here in the European Parliament. I don't know if you are more than me. We're
Probably
fighting.
not.
We're fighting together.
Yeah, we are.
On this. So do you think freedom of speech exists in Europe right now? And in what extent?
No. It on paper, it does, obviously. I mean, we have it in our constitutions pretty much, right? In the German constitution, I'm pretty sure it's in your country, the same thing. It even says it in the statutes, I want to call them, of the EU, right? It's one of the EU values that they are always, praising so much, their values. But in principle or in de facto, it does not. So if it is possible, maybe there's one story. So that one time it happened that in the middle of a committee meeting, apparently I committed a hate crime, right? In the middle of a committee meeting. So if you hear that, okay, she committed a hate crime. What comes to your mind? Did I pull out a knife or, stab people? Of course not. I did not do any such thing. I simply made a statement. What I said was, just to be clear, and I quote, just to be clear, there are exactly two sexes, men and women. And that was supposed to have been that hate crime. They wanted to launch an investigation into me for having committed a hate crime. I mean, it's totally absurd. I'm terribly sorry. The statement, there's exactly two sexes, men and women, is a factually, biologically, scientifically based correct.
I think what they're trying to do is put some regulations in place and all this stuff. When there is time and they will need it, they will be able to control the narrative and abandon freedom of speech, like what COVID did. So I think now what I'm afraid is like, and I think Pavel Durov is saying this, and I admire also some of his stunts that he's doing with telegrams and all this stuff about freedom of speech. He's saying that all these things that scanning, you need to have ID to be on social media. when you are 60, under 16. It's just going to help people, but in a way, you are give more power to these people to know exactly who you are and all this stuff, to not have anonymous accounts, to be able to say stuff, because
of course.
So they are putting, I think, I'm afraid, the infrastructure,
yeah,
when there is something in the future to be able, but I believe that there is freedom of speech right now in Europe in general. Yeah. I don't think we're being censored here and there about things, maybe some things, but I think what they're trying to do is put things, I don't know if you agree with this statement that I said in a way.
Well, I mean, but freedom of speech, like I said, it is, on paper, we have it, obviously, but it is no longer being observed and lived. For example, in Germany, you get visits from the police now early in the morning, like at 6 a.m. Now we have this joke going. You always should have your bathrobe ready, right? Simply because like one pensioner, he called, the Minister of Economics, Robert Habeck, a moron. Right? He didn't even write he's a moron. He just used like a meme, right? So yeah, and he was prosecuted for it, I mean, it's insane. I mean, I believe that our Chancellor now, Friedrich Merz, he's a complete idiot. And I should be allowed to say that. I mean, he can prove me wrong by doing the right thing and by implementing good policies. But every day he proves me right. He is a complete idiot. But if people get prosecuted for criticizing government, which is one of the core elements of every democracy, you need to be able to scrutinize and, of course, criticize your government. If that is being criminalized, then we have a problem. Then we are no longer in democracy. And the infrastructure you're talking about, they're implementing exactly that. So they will be able to sort out the dissidents. And where have we seen that before? We have seen that in Soviet communism. We have seen that in GDR. There was the Soviet-controlled part of Germany, right? They had the Stasi. And the only thing why the GDR actually failed, the state failed, because the Stasi, they literally suffocated from all the information they had gathered on the citizens, and they didn't have the manpower to work through all of the information. But given the technological means nowadays, computers, AI, it would be nothing. A state would literally know every single detail about every single citizen. And this is really the scary part here. If you live in a democracy, the citizens have a right to know everything about the government. In a tyranny, however, the government knows everything about the citizen. And that's the huge difference. And we are well on our way to sliding up into a totalitarian regime. And there is so many indications for just that. You already mentioned a few. The censorship on social media. Now Ursula von der Leyen is coming up with you need ID to access social media. There is so many examples, right? I really have to say, I was not afraid of COVID. I really wasn't. I was afraid of my government and what they were capable of doing. And they have shown their colors, especially during COVID. Threatening people with their livelihoods. You won't have a job if you don't get the jab. You can't ride the bus, literally isolating them. That's how you erect a totalitarian